Hello, everybody. Welcome to episode 3 of Ilizwi Moja Africa podcast. In case you don't know, Ilizwi is a Xhosa word meaning voice, and Moja is a Swahili word meaning one. And our aim is to create a platform for the youth in Africa to come together and have one voice. We aim to be a platform where young people are able to voice out opinions about different topics from the African perspective in the realm of politics. My name is Harry Rianga, and I am a pastor, an author, and a leadership coach at Shuja Rising Consulting. Shuja is a Swahili word meaning hero, warrior, and brave, and I believe that everyone is a Shuja, and I aim to empower people with leadership skills so that they can become the Shuja that God created them to be. Now, allow me to introduce my co-hosts. I will start with Silindile Mthembu, and she is an academic reviewer from South Africa with extensive research on political science, particularly feminist theory and human rights. She has a master's degree in political science. Kinile Nzinisa is an ecologist from the Kingdom of Eswatini. Her interests are in youth advocacy and climate justice. She has a strong academic background in conversation ecology, and she volunteers full-time with international and local environmental organizations. Thank you so much for tuning into our podcast. And early this year, we kicked off with a series on decolonization. In January, our episode was about decolonization of the mind. And we saw that basically it entailed liberating our minds from any mindset that limits us from embracing our unique African qualities, our culture, our lifestyle, our heritage. We talked about why it is important to decolonize our minds and ways that we can go about it. Last month, we celebrated International Mother Language Day by holding a Twitter chat where we discussed ways of decolonizing language. Today, we want to dive into decolonization of culture, of which language is a part of. So this is part 2 in our 4-part decolonization series. So before we start, please, if you haven't already, follow us on Twitter at Ilizwi Moja, double L's, or on Facebook at Ilizwi Moja to continue our conversations. Also, feel free to like and subscribe to our channel. And as the discussion is going on, we hope that you'd also comment and share your thoughts with us on the matter. So now, how about we frame our discussion of today, decolonization of culture? So we live in a society that embraces Western culture. From the movies we watch to the music we listen to, the language we use, heck, we're speaking English right now, the clothes we wear, they're all indicative of the heavy influence that the West has had on our culture. And it's not a bad thing to borrow things from other cultures. I actually think it's a wonderful thing. We live in a global village, but we can't help but learn from each other and pick up helpful things from our neighbors across the pond. We just can't help it. Global village. However, when we assimilate all these foreign concepts of culture at the detriment and the denigration of our own, then there is a problem. When we look down on our own way of life and behave as though the Western culture is superior to ours, there definitely needs to be some form of introspection done. And therefore, the unfortunate thing is, we as Africans are the ones who have been programmed to regard our own cultures with disdain. We've been trained to think that our practices, our way of life, and culture is uncivilized. These days, there's like barely any difference between the music that's produced in Africa and the music that's produced in the West. We're trying to emulate them. Videos with video vixens and skimpy clothes and themes of violence and debauchery. We're even copying some of their ideals, which are less than stellar, all in the name of development. So long as this continues, the West and the East will continue to have an upper hand, and we will never develop as a continent. So with that framework in mind, I'd like to open up the discussion by asking, Why is Western culture so appealing to Africans? Why is the case?
Yeah, I just want to jump right in. Thank you so much, Harry, for the discussion. I think it's so interesting, particularly because I think the whole idea of Western culture wasn't necessarily a desire during pre-colonial African times. And that notion of aspiring to Western ideals and beliefs and so forth has basically just been forced on us to have this sense of like Western culture is the ideal, Western culture is more favorable. And so with that, it just continues from generation to generation where that mindset, that narrative of aspiring towards Western culture it almost just passes on throughout our generation. And so that's why we have situations where in hip hop culture, we look to the West, we look into pop culture, we look into R&B culture. That's all aspects where influence from the West, their music and so forth. And I think that in itself we tend to adopt it and try to even assimilate it in our own traditional way in our music. And so these are the kind of aspects where we can even trace back into colonial times, but definitely there is such a huge interest for adopting Western culture.
That is actually so true. Nile, would you like to add something to that?
Yes, I think just like Slee has already said, it's one thing that this culture was imposed on us, but now it is like our way of life, basically. It's we have appropriated so much so that it has become almost like our like a part and parcel of our lives. And the appealing part comes from not just from the fact that, you know, when you listen to the music, like Liz already said, when you watch the movies, it's don't watch TV, the movies that are going to be shown or the programs that are going to be shown are the Western ones. But aside from that, it comes from it shows this part of being a better culture. It comes with a sense of improvement, of betterment. And I think, personally, I think it's because of the convenience that comes with it, because it comes with technology, which is more convenient. And we are naturally, I think personally as well, I am attracted to things that are more convenient for me. If um, using my phone makes me communicate better, then I'm going to think maybe this is the way to go. You know, it's more appealing because of that. And yeah, I think that side of it makes it more interesting to everyone because it's not just because it has been there since the colonization, but because it is still there through our media and also the convenience part.
And to be fair, not everything Western, which is convenient, is an evil. Like, they brought us technology, which is a great thing. You know, I guess it's just how do you balance adopting what is good with the West, what is good with the East, but not at the cost of now losing your own heritage, your own traditions. I'm kind of thinking about how during the Meiji Revolution in Japan and Emperor Meiji, he was opening up Japan to the West, and he sent emissaries to go to America and just go and see what is good there and bring back what you think is nice. But they brought back medicine, they brought back some technology, you know, just modern technology conveniences of the day, the box camera and stuff like that, and people started dressing Western like, but it did not water down the Japanese culture. And even to date, the Japanese, like in the East, if you go to the Asian countries, they still very much hold on to their traditional heritage, their culture, their ways of life, even if they've embraced some things from the West. So I just don't know. I just wonder how do we strike that balance? If we say that the colonization of culture is authentically non-Western, whether it consists of art, cultural practices, you know, traditions or knowledge. How do we even know what is authentically ours as Africans? I'm just asking because everything is kind of mixed, especially this new generation. How
Mm.
do we know what what is inherently ours versus what came from the West, because you just grew up with it the same, like how do we navigate that?
Yeah. And I just want to pick up from that discussion that you mentioned about the Japanese culture, particularly because I think that is such an interesting point in that they still were able to retain their culture without having to completely just assimilate themselves to Western culture. But I think that's also when we look into the intricacies of colonization and just slavery in itself, um, with that, there is that aspect of how to say it? I think when it comes to like just cultural mixing and these kind of things that happens, there's a brutality involved in that when westernizing the Africans, and I think that's why, in as much as I would believe, or I would think that there was a need to retain as much of the culture, that authentic culture that we started losing in the colonial times. And as much as there was that need to retain it, there was that brutal force that was inflicted upon us to the point where it almost became a need to adopt to Western culture in order to survive. If we don't know a certain language, if I can't speak in English to my slave master, that essentially would risk my survival, or speaking French or whatever it may be, that would essentially risk my survival if we don't have that sense of communication. So I think that in itself could be a sort of issue of why it was difficult for us to really retain a lot of our rich genuine culture that we had in pre-colonial times. And a good question on the fact that indeed, what does it mean essentially that if we adopt Western culture and then there's our culture? So it's like when we have these cultures, what can we say is Western culture? And what can we say is essentially our culture, especially with a lot of mixing that's taking place. That took place, in fact, like centuries ago. We see these things of mixing, and it's a challenging one. It's a very challenging one because oftentimes when I look into culture, I look into a more communal aspect of it versus an individual aspect of culture. And I think a lot of the times in today's society, we sort of individualize culture when the way people dress, the way people articulate themselves, they articulate themselves through as individuals versus through a sort of culture that they've adopted to in a group setting. So I think with that, I don't know, like it's not necessarily straight cut. I don't think it's straight cut to kind of say that this is Western or this is, this particular culture. I think there's a lot of intricate details that are involved because even in my own culture, in my own tradition, we have adopted certain things that are not necessarily the tradition that we had in during, centuries ago, but we've adopted it, but we've taken it as our culture versus it being, maybe Western or whatnot. So I think there's those kind of fine details that are not really straight cuts.
I totally agree with you, Slee. That's a very difficult question because, like you said, these things were forced into us. So a lot was lost during that process, and a lot was adopted as well. Like when you look at religion, you look at Christianity, it is now considered as part of our culture. As Swazis, we identify ourselves as a Christian nation because it's so linked to our way of life that we cannot separate the two. And when you look at our marriage weddings, like the whole wedding event, you have your white wedding and then you do the what you call the paying dowry, lobolo, and you do the whole gifting of families. Now it's so mixed because some people don't want to practice certain parts of the like the Swazi way. They want to infuse the religious or Christianity way, and it's just so mixed up that honestly, it's all about what you want to do these days. And when you look at our clothing, it's also a very cultural, if I may say, in terms of we still celebrate a lot of our cultural heritage and events and festivities and stuff like that. But there's always been this controversial topic into saying, why is it that when these young maidens go to attend the reed dance, they wear these mini skirts? They are literally just half naked. But when you see now a woman or a young girl wearing an actual mini skirt, not that like the cultural attire, but in actual miniskirts. And now it's like looked down upon, it is immoral, it is what sort is what's not. So it's just a lot of confusion as to say what is cultural and what is not, what do we accept? Because people are now dressing differently, and it's a lot, it brings a lot of confusion. But what I can say is that it is so mixed, and I think at this point that is not the important part of what is more cultural and what is more African and what is not. The point is, as we need to, because culture does evolve over time, so we just need to find those basic intangible um, products, like the values, the principles, the morals that we hold as Africans. We should keep holding on to that, not the clothing, not the the whole materialistic things, but hold on to the non-materialistic things, because that will be the only way that we can forge a way forward into helping ourselves psychologically, and the manners in which we still embrace our communities and stuff like that. So I think for me, that is the important part, not just to look at what is more African and what is not, but how can we hold on into these things? I think because I believe that what makes us more African, if I may say, the Ubuntu spirit, that community spirit, those values that we hold. I think that's what makes culture, our culture different from other people's cultures.
For sure, I like how you are zeroing in on the intangible, like what's the spirit behind our African culture? Because then we can't really even say African culture because Africa has so many countries, but just generally, how do you operate with in our different nations within the continent of Africa? And you're right, Ubuntu spirit is one of them. We are just known as, I am not okay until I know you're okay. Have you eaten? Let's eat together. Let's share. Let's farm together. Let's do things together. Let me raise you up so that we rise together. So those are awesome intangible things. But I wonder, I think maybe once we have internalized we have this whole mindset change, and we've actually internalized our what can I say, value for Africanness. Don't you think it should now materialize on the external? Because maybe we're trying to focus on the external without working on the internal. Because if I fully embrace myself as an African, and you know what, I like who I am, I was born on this continent and I'm proud of that, we are awesome people, then, for example, I won't be afraid to wear my hair, my 4C hair, as it is. I won't be struggling with weaves and wigs, and there's nothing wrong with that. But it's sometimes we tend to wear weaves or wigs because we don't like our hair. We want it to be bouncing and free in the air. So, what are your thoughts on that?
Yes, that's actually such a good point. It's funny how you spoke about just, rocking our natural hair. Just those are kind of like, ways in which we've been able to embrace our culture and embrace our sort of, I guess, our indigenous pride, if that's the right way of putting it. And it is interesting because it also goes to how far do we go in our external representation of our culture? Like, do we go as far as dressing into traditional wear? Because that's also kind of like the practicality of it. And I think then it goes into this idea of what does, decolonizing culture essentially means. Because if we're looking into then dressing into our traditional wear, would that necessarily be as a way of decolonizing culture? Or is it that, wait a minute, us not dressing in our traditional way doesn't necessarily mean that we do not embrace our culture, but that we are moving in the modern world. And so in the modern world, this is how people wear things, regardless of the different cultures that they come from. And so external representation, it is definitely a good point to start off with, because we can wear our hair the way that it should be worn, well, that I would perceive to be the way that it should be worn, that it can be worn natural, because that's how our hair is. But at the same time, it's also kind of like, how do we also embrace other areas of externalizing our culture? Maybe it also goes into the language aspects as well. We speak more of our local language, and that can in itself be an external representation. But yeah, but it's a tricky one, the external aspect. I think there's more of, I guess we can say, more research and studies on the internal ways of understanding decolonizing ourselves, decolonizing culture. But the external as well is also a good point to touch on.
Yes, I'm just thinking now that you're talking about the external part of it, because I feel like for as long as you don't fully embrace it, like you don't fully embrace the uniqueness, the beauty, the melanin drippingness of being African, then you cannot proudly be externally. And I look at this not just through the hair, but at some point there was this escalating number of stories about skin bleaching. And people are like, but it's my choice, I don't want to be black, because of maybe some psychological thing that's going on, or the way that they were raised. I remember growing up, most of the teenagers at school, they put on, I think it was Pond's. There was this very famous brand for making your skin looking whiter, or was it? I don't remember the actual brand, but they were really, into that because they wanted to look lighter than, than most Africans. And you're talking about the hair. There is so much mindset shift that has to happen. For the longest time, I used to go to a Catholic school. You couldn't wear your afro to school. It was considered unneat, So it's not just the fact that I am embracing being all African, but also because the community, the society that I live in is not ready for me to be, externally representing, being proudly African. But other than that, I think in Eswatini, we are one of the few cultures that really embrace the external appearance in terms of, well, things are changing obviously because of all the political or political climate in the country. But for the longest time, we have been allowed to go to work wearing, our traditional gear, but depending on what you're wearing, because like Slee said, our cultural or traditional attires are very diverse, and some of them, they can be seen as inappropriate, but there are those. I think it's all about going back to what makes us African. What do you think is more representable in the space that you're in? Because you're all about, making everyone feel comfortable. But then there's also debatable, because it's mostly just, objectivity versus subjectivity. But all in all, I just want to say that it's very difficult, because there is a lot of psychological damage that has been done for people to change their appearance, to say, I'm proudly African because I wear my short, I just cut my dreadlocks, my goodness. Not for any reason, really. I'm just tired of my hair. But that's just one of the beautiful things about being African. You can be, all short hair today, all looking like, I don't know, someone else tomorrow. I think it's one of the beauty that comes with us being, if you're proudly African, you can literally wear a weave today and wear your afro tomorrow and comb cross the following day, cut your hair, have a bald hair and what's not. I think it's all about your mindset, like where you are psychologically, and then you can be able to express that externally if you feel okay. But other than that, it's a very controversial topic. That's all I can say for now.
Yeah, I'm totally agreeing with you on that. Like, where do you even begin? Like, where do you start with the whole, this is our culture, this is not our culture? And I guess you can't, I mean, even if you are embracing your Africanness, some traditional clothes are just not appropriate for some spaces. I get that. But I want to just refer to what's something that Lee said. She talked about modernization, like we are moving with the times and we are dressing according to the modern world. But I was reading a definition written in the just at the aftermath of the Second World War. I forget the scholar, but he was defining development and modernization as westernization. And I think because to a degree, when we talk about modernization, what do we mean modernization? And who defines what modernization is? Because I feel this whole modernization conversation is more inclined to what is acceptable in foreign countries. So even when we say that we are dressing according to the modern times, what are these modern times and who defines what the modern times are so that we should dress according to that?
The one who
I'm just,
controls the economy. Oh my goodness, I'm sorry, that's it. I was saying the
no
one who
worries.
controls the economy is the one who defines what is modern, what we should trust, what we should eat, what technology we should be using, because they are controlling the economy. They're controlling everything, what we watch, what we see on TV, where the funding is going to be focused this year, everything. So it is easy for that person to define what is modernization at that space and time.
So according to what you're saying, Nile, you're saying that the person who defines modernization is the person who controls the economy. So I can't exactly define it as slavery or colonization, but basically you're saying we are submitted to another person's ideology. Like, so in the end, are we really decolonized? Are we really liberated if still whatever dictates how we dress, how we operate, how we talk, how we live is an external force? Like we are being, our actions, our lifestyle is being dictated by an external force, whether it is consciously or subconsciously. Then have we really achieved decolonization of the mind, let alone culture? I think that's that's now where I am at based on your statements. It just really gives one pause. Right. So I want to kind of wrap it up by just closing this discussion with this one question, but let me frame the question. So I read this definition of decolonization of culture by this scholar. He's an African scholar called Aimé César. I think he's from a francophone country. I hope I've pronounced his name right, but he was of the opinion that decolonization of culture is not necessarily finding what is non-Western and embracing that, just stripping yourself of everything that is Western. Because for him, what colonization did is basically just create a hierarchy of creator and consumer. So the colonialists, who had all of the means of economy, is the creator and the African is the consumer. They create a narrative, we consume. They create this and we basically have no sense of agency. So what he says, what his idea of decolonization of culture is basically just rewriting the narrative so that we are now the creators, we are not the consumers. So it's basically, how do we now avoid the West or the East from being the creators of our narratives, of our thought processes, of our definitions and ideologies? How do we make sure that now we have flipped the script and we are the creators? We are the ones who are rewriting our history. We are the ones who are deciding what modernization is, what our culture is, even if our culture has changed. Because for sure, our culture does evolve. It is not a static phenomenon. Based on that definition by Aimee, how do you think now we can, moving forward, decolonize our culture? How can we promote our own culture? How, in that frame of mind, do you think we can be able to at least take a step forward, even if the West still does have a form of strings attached on us? But how do we move forward in light of that?
I think we should just stop buying clothes in places like the US and in, because I think also just like embrace our own clothes. No, I'm just joking, actually. We will not stop buying clothes. Oh my word, we're just gonna keep buying. Okay, but yes, to be serious, to be more serious, I think it's it is something just to be able to recreate our own. In fact, actually, let me go back to that clothes aspect because I think in recreating our own kind of narrative of our culture and not being written in Western history, sorry, in histories by Western individuals, it's let's look into these kind of things with clothes where you have a lot of clothes being embraced by fashion designers who want to be able to put in African patterns and try to be able to put in any aspect of our culture, our authentic culture. So even with that, that's like, in as much as it's a kind of um not necessarily a huge way of embracing culture, but it is quite a significant way of actually showing, the West and how we are recreating brands that are often very much viewed as much more authentically Western, whereas with us, we are now being pushed into the realm of like your fashion shows and going into areas where it's very traditionally Western, and now we are coming in with our African clothes and prints and showing our culture. So that is also a significant way of doing that. But and also recreating our culture as well through that particular instance. And I think also just another way of recreating our culture is, as you were saying, Harry, that doesn't necessarily mean that we just completely stripping away certain things that are Western or things that we've adopted and have come to be adopted as our sort of own culture, or that we've assimilated to those particular things. Like for instance, with Emma Cizé, as you were saying, he does come from a Francophone country, and with him, does he then stop speaking French, or like, because again, like with him, the actual French language is becoming or has been embraced as part of his culture, as well as in various other cultures as well, where they've really just assimilated the language as part of theirs. And it's not necessarily mean that we're stripping it away completely, but just also looking into the local dialects and the significance of those dialects as well. And so I think there's that sort of balance that needs to take place where it's allowing ourselves to still have the kind of modern ways in which we go through things, like whether it's the way in which we dress, having those sort of modern aspects, but also realizing that the cultural aspects as well should still be elevated upon those modern aspects. Like, for instance, embracing whether it's the white wedding or the traditional wedding, embracing both aspects if need be, to show that the the actual white wedding has now been assimilated into our culture, but we also are embracing the traditional aspects as well. So it's kind of trying to balance these things.
Nile?
Just from the last thing that you said, trying to balance, I think the important part for me, without marginalizing our own thing, because we as Africans are the ones who are perpetuating the continuity of, the colonization. Because you'd say that I'm doing to the Christian or white wedding or civil wedding, whatever word that you use, because there are certain practices that are demonic in the Swazi way of doing things. And I think that is just unnecessary. Why can't you just practice your thing, embrace your thing without making other people's sacred religions feel more demonized, or whatever derogatory word that you may use. But other than that, I think as Lee has already said most of the things, I would say that it is a good thing to be materialistic, to a certain extent. We should want to have tangible products as Africans, have our own art museums, all of those collections of things that make us African, and the technologies, improving in industries and skills, but at the same time, try to embrace and protect our intangible products as well. The morals, the values, the hospitality. When we were in America, there were a lot of these people were living on the streets. I think it's happening in most parts of Africa as well, but it's not so common in Swaziland. I'm not saying it's not there. It's not so common because we extend our love and protection and loyalty to our extended families, and we have this communityness that protects us as we grow up. I think that's just one of the things that make us unique, and we should protect those things, like our music, our dances, our songs. Trevor Noah once made a joke about how Africans protest versus how Western people protest, because we'll be dancing, we'll be singing during a protest, trying to demonstrate during a strike. And it's just one of those things that make us different. It's beautiful to witness. We come up with these beautiful songs that make us unite and different, but also our food. There's just so many ways of protecting our culture. Our food, let's embrace it. Fine, we cannot still be using the same methods of cooking, the same way of cooking, but be proud to be eating whatsoever traditional food that you consider traditional. Be proud of that. It shouldn't be always this going to this fancy restaurant that you can't even pronounce anything on the menu, and you feel like, oh, I have made it in life. Fine, you've made it in life, you're paying ridiculous money for something that you're not going to pronounce and what's not. But then do not marginalize it. Do not make me feel inferior if you see me enjoying my, I don't know, sweet potatoes. I don't know what. So for me, that spirit of Ubuntu, that thing of saying, we have this saying of that's what's that idiom? It takes a village to raise a child. That also speaks into our Ubuntu-ness, if there's a word like that, okay. So like us being a nation or a continent that is more integrated into strong, cohesive in groups, extended families, protecting and exchanging all of that love in these groups that we form. I think that is beautiful, and that's what we should protect and conserve and pass into the next generation.
That is so true. We just have some intrinsic values that they're just classic and they're just so African, and they just really help us to transcend different challenges. They help us cope. And when you're talking about enjoying your cassava vis-a-vis headed to a French restaurant, maybe, and you can barely pronounce any of the food on the menu, I was just thinking how ironic it is that we in Africa, we grew up, or rather, we started by eating organic food, right? Food that we didn't even know it was organic. We just knew we have naturally grown the food. There's no GMO. It was just from the ground, natural, waiting our natural chicken. And then suddenly, eating fast food is cool and eating out is cool, and we stopped going to the farms. And now suddenly the West have embraced organic foods and are now telling us the benefits of organic food. But that's how we're doing, so just the irony now.
Controls the economy, Harry.
I know, but I was just like, this is just very, very messed up. So let me just end by reading I found this paragraph from an article when I was doing my research about decolonization of culture, and I just think it's a really nice way to end, especially as you keep on emphasizing he who controls the economy. So let me just read the paragraph. It says, decolonization involves identifying colonial systems, structures, and relationships, and working to challenge those systems. It is not integration or simply the token inclusion of the intellectual achievements of non-white cultures. Rather, it involves a paradigm shift from a culture of exclusion and denial to the making of space for other political philosophies and knowledge systems. It is a culture shift to thinking more widely about why common knowledge is what it is, and in so doing, adjusting cultural perceptions and power relations. So, in my estimation, if we want to decolonize culture, we need to adjust, we need to challenge the system that is there, adjust our cultural perceptions, and definitely adjust the power relations. Because for sure, he who controls the economy, he who controls the narrative tells the tale. But I think we are the ones. I think our generation, we have the power of the internet. It is a Western phenomenon, but I am seeing that we have the power of, we have the power of language, we have the power of information, of communication. We can connect with people across Africa and we can get our message heard if we want to, as the youth of Africa. So that's it for today. Thank you so much for tuning into our podcast. Don't forget to like, subscribe, share this episode. Bye.